with another episode of Relational Leadership, where we try to bring leadership tips that will apply to your everyday life. Whether you're just the leader of a bunch of munchkins or the CEO of a large company, there's things in here for you, and try to come up with different topics and fun ways to express those.
So my host, Stephanie Clements, is with us today, and I'm going to be talking as Shawn Dawley about communication. And that word means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but we're going to just tease out that intangible, I dare say, art of how we express ourselves, how we relate to other people, both verbally, written form, non-verbally,
Mhm.
probably the most important of the three, because it all so often seems like, though we're surrounded by people with all types of various degrees of talent, communication as a skill oftentimes is that critical, intangible ingredient that makes such a big difference.
Right. Well, there's so many ways that what while we know exactly what we want to say, that it can also be misinterpreted, and reasons for that, that we're going to go through and try to talk about how to overcome
Hmm.
some of that, because there's generational.
Sure, sure.
So I've got some examples of that, in the sense of, the things that we may have said were like, oh, that's gnarly, or gag me with a spoon. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, and before that, it was like that's far out, man. I mean,
Yeah,
there's the English language is always under evolutionary pressure
right.
to change, and though the change seems to be happening very, very fast, I don't know that the change of the language will ever be this slow again. And I
No.
couldn't help but notice this odd symmetry between like the first written communication, you might say, were cave paintings,
Sure.
and then it was cuneiform script in Samaria, then hieroglyphics, and eventually like an alphabetic language. And at the high peak, we might have had, Shakespearean prose. And then, sometime later, we had 50 Shades of Grey, then we had emails, then we had text, and now
And
people are
that's all
back
just
to
initials
communicating
and
with emojis. Like we're back
yeah.
to the cave painting, right? Like
Right.
it's almost like we've done this big art.
Right. No, you're right. You ain't capping.
I don't know if that's an insult or if that is.
So cap means lie. So you ain't lying.
Oh, okay. See,
So
let me. I
see,
better write that down. I
yeah.
learned something
So
new.
so
Well, yeah,
there's always fun.
and because so much of our modern communication does take place, with our thumbs.
Right.
So let's say that I ask, my wife, "Hey, what would you like to do tonight for dinner?" And she replies back, and she spells out whatever. Well, a computer might read that as whatever. I might, depending on the mood I am, think she said whatever, or
Yeah.
maybe she meant whatever, So,
Yeah. Right.
so sometimes there's baggage that is unintentionally accompanying, the
Sure.
things we communicate. And since we do communicate so much via text or email, that's something that we should always probably take into account. I know I try to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. My daughter, actually, I had sent her a copy of something that I had written,
Mhm.
and she said, I've read this in your business voice, and I've read this in your angry voice, and I've read this in your happy voice, and I'm not
Right, right.
100% sure which one.
So, so years ago, I had this, this brilliant idea. If somebody is careening through an intersection and you are trying to communicate to them, you're going to honk your horn, and you don't mind it being loud and aggressive.
Right.
"Eh." But when you're sitting behind somebody and the light turns green and it's like one potato, two potato, it's like, I wish my horn had a feature where it would go like, beep, boop,
Yeah.
something a little more like,
Yeah.
hey, just a heads up.
Right.
So I almost wish we could like decide on a convention. Okay, from now on, when we text, if we're trying to be sarcastic, we have to type it in red letters.
Yeah.
If we're trying to be nice, we type it in green. So
Yeah.
can we all settle on something so there's no misunderstanding?
Right.
Because there's been times I've received text and I thought, okay, maybe I'm being sensitive and I'm reading more into this than
Sure.
they intended. And at the other end of that equation, though, I thought, well, how many times have I sent the text or an email, and maybe upon rereading it a day later, like, oh my gosh, I sure hope they didn't take that the
Right,
wrong way because that
right.
wasn't my intent.
Well, even with the spoken language, I mean, we just talked about, I spent the weekend in New York.
Hmm.
We probably heard every language in the world
Sure.
going down,
Yeah.
so there are different connotations or even meanings or interpretations of words that, while we as in the US may mean a word a
Hmm.
certain way, it can be taken very differently in
Absolutely.
another country.
Absolutely.
And so that's another thing, as companies are moving more international
Uh-huh.
and have international workers and things like that, you have to think about how you communicate
Yes.
with that because they could take it totally different than the meaning that and you don't even realize.
Sure. Sure. And of the nearly 8 billion people on the planet, a third of them live in Asia, whereby their language in its written form uses characters. So, like when I lived in Japan and traveled through China, I mean, these are languages that have, 5 to 8,000 unique characters,
Right.
which, to the second grader trying to learn all those and all the different strokes, is seemingly overwhelming. However, when you stop and think in the English language with only 26 letters, we can arrange them in these infinite combinations such that there are, up to maybe a couple 100,000 words in the English language. And so what I had found in traveling through Asia is that some of their syntax was a lot more direct, whereas we, if you were to really stop and catalog as you go throughout your day, how many colloquialisms you use,
Right.
the whole 9 yards, get your ducks in a row. I mean,
Yeah.
we use somewhat. Could you imagine trying to learn the language? And once you go through the, subject, verb, direct object, academics of the English language, then you come to America and you're asking for directions and people are talking to you and they're using all this slang,
Right. Right.
which to us is as native speakers, right? It's no problem.
Sure.
But we have a very colorful language that I can tell you firsthand from traveling around the world does not directly translate all the time.
No, if I'm talking to my team and I say, "Hey guys, this is going to be tough. We're going to have to get down in the mud, get dirty and just push through this." You know, all of a sudden I may have one guy going, "Okay, well, I guess I got to go get in the mud." I don't know what this has to do with it, but
Right.
that's what she said I have to
Sure,
do.
sure, sure.
And because they don't understand that even though the majority of us would.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, they're going, how does this help us get anything done?
Right. Yeah. No. Again, it is an exceedingly colorful language, and then even within the I say American English speakers, because we know that the British are going to have their own
Sure.
nuances. We've got subcultures. So as a former pilot, I could tell you that there would be times where I might have a 5-minute conversation with another aviator about a non-aviation topic, and we will slip in lingo from
Sure.
our profession.
Right.
So when somebody says, "All right, I'm hungry, let's pull chocks," then like you literally pull the chocks from the wheel of the aircraft, which means you're going to leave.
Right.
Well, if I tell my wife, "Hey, let's pull chocks. It's time for dinner," like, what the heck does that? Like, I don't.
You're right. Right. Well, and that's the thing, I mean, in the workplace and depending on the size of your business, there's different people that specialize in different things. And you may need to communicate, a very real example for me was that I worked for a company and I was in charge of getting this very, very intricate website built. Now, not me personally, because I'm not a computer person,
Okay.
but I needed to convey to a computer, a web designer
Sure.
and all of this, computer programmer and what all this needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, our brains just work totally
Yeah.
differently
Yeah.
and how they can.
Yeah.
And so then he'll go, so do you want this, the syntax to do this and this? And I'm like, wait, 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 wait. I have no idea what you
Yeah.
just said.
Right.
And I'm trying to explain it. And he's in the best way that I know how. And, so it was a lot, there's trial and error trying to get
Sure.
those
Sure.
things communicated because we have different backgrounds and the way, the way I'm trying to tell him to do his job is not the way
Sure,
he's
sure.
known to be told to do it.
Right, and the neuroscientific literature is always changing. It's amazing how much we don't know about our own brains. And we used to hear that, okay, well, if you're logical, you're left brained. If you're creative, you're right brained. And we now know that we all use all parts of our brain.
Right.
But we, as non-neuroscientists, can look around and tell you that some people are more creative, some people are more analytical. And so you can imagine in the modern corporate world, whether you're at a big company or even a small one, you might have the real creative, artsy people that are running social media campaigns. Then you have the IT department that keeps the backbone infrastructure running. Then you've got the accountants and those in finance. So you've got people with different inclinations coming out of different tribes. And the way that they communicate with one another can sometimes be such that during an exchange, somebody may stop and say, I have no idea what you just said.
Right.
Like you are speaking a different language to
Well,
me.
there's tons of books and tons of classes and things like that on communication because first off, we have men and women. I mean, the old book, that from John Gray that said, men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
Mhm.
We don't necessarily speak the same language just because our brains are wired differently, just in that. So, I mean, obviously, communication can be an issue in a husband and wife relationship. Then trying to talk to your kids,
No
and then
comment.
we expanded. But people have been trying to figure this out forever.
Yeah.
But then you add in, and I was looking at the different types of what they consider communication gaps. And so,
Okay.
so one is emotional. I am going to receive something different if I'm already upset
Yeah,
than if I'm in a different place.
that's right.
I also, maybe my boss is just somebody I can't stand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just hard to take it in. And so you don't necessarily fully listen and engage when they're talking because I just don't like them.
Yeah.
Or
No,
they've
I
asked
know.
you to do a project that you just really don't like. There's all kinds of things, and those mean that the communication can break down because your emotions are in the way.
That's right. And we are emotional creatures. We often talk about, we might even use terms unintentionally to say, well, happy is the good emotion and angry is the bad emotion.
Right.
But what I would offer is that as mammals, if we have an emotion intrinsic to our condition, it serves a purpose.
Right.
So if you get angry and you blow up in line at Citgo trying to pay for something, that may be anger that was not well channeled. However, if you've got an intruder in your house at 2 a.m. and you get angry and you protect your children, we could say that, well, then in that instance, the
Right.
anger served a great purpose.
There's righteous anger, and then
That's right. Yeah. And so we sometimes approach issues at work that involve communication as math problems, almost as if, well, if we just think it through, we can come up with the right solution. But we have to take into account that people will feel their way through, some
Sure.
of this. And I say that as one who messed that up several times. Like as a new leader, I thought, okay, well, this is course of action is so obvious and so appropriate that once I, through a monologue, push it out to the masses, they will receive it purely intellectually the way I intended it. Well, I didn't take into account that not all of them were as pleased with my
Right.
chosen course of action as I was. And so I really, through the hard way, began to incorporate an appreciation for, regardless of what I intend, there is the possibility that it will be emotionally received differently. Now, it
Sure.
doesn't mean that I have to necessarily retract, my chosen course of action, but at least be sensitive
Sure.
in the delivery.
Right. And we don't know, I mean, all kinds of things. There may be nothing wrong at work, but when I woke up, the baby was sick, and then I had to get trash out and the
Yeah.
trash bag broke, and I'm just flustered. And as much as I may love my job, I'm just not in the position to receive
Yeah.
everything like I should be. So that we have emotional, then we have physical. First off, I think we have more ADD, ADHD than ever.
Mhm.
And, we may be trying to sit and listen in a meeting about, here's the directions we're going to go out in, but there's somebody out here, we've got a construction site right outside our, there
Yeah.
could be something going on. And all of a sudden I've totally lost 3 of those sentences that may have
Sure.
been really key
Sure.
to it, but I got
Yeah.
distracted, or there's noise, or, your phone does
Right.
something and you're like, "Oh, I need to take that text." And all of a sudden I've lost what I was supposed to be in. So the physical things definitely can get in the way.
They can. And, we live in an era where, as we sit here right now, and as people listening to us, maybe in their cars or in their office, there are people all around the planet diligently at work trying to come up with the next gadget, the next app that will compete with our finite attention.
Right.
I've often wondered, and I think somebody even posed this rhetorical question, could Jane Austen have written Pride and Prejudice as a young woman if she had TikTok?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like some of the like you're talking about, like those in your example, these are the 3 sentences that had the most weight. However, because our attention is being spread so thin, I wonder sometimes how deep we can really invest ourselves
That's
in
it.
communication.
You just almost have to throw out bullet points and then say, "Hey, if you need more information, come see me," because
Yeah,
they just, we don't have the mental capacity. And it's funny because, you mentioned TikTok, but they used to say, like 5 or 6 years ago, they said that your video shouldn't be more than about 90 seconds. That was as long attention span as you could do.
yeah.
And now they're saying you need to put it into 7-second
Goodness
segments,
gracious. Yeah,
because we're so used to TikTok, scrolling and just having
yeah,
that quick little tidbit.
yeah.
And, we're, and unfortunately, it's not a good thing for us, that we have trained our brains to not engage in anything for longer than just
Yeah,
that
you're
snap
right.
of that finger.
That's and 7 seconds is a funny number because I think a goldfish has a 10-second memory. So now we're 70% of a goldfish's attention
Oh,
span.
no.
So again, I mean, I know that I'm going to come off kind of like a cantankerous old man, back in my day.
Yeah.
But again, like I think about how years ago, Leo Tolstoy's huge volume War and Peace was like required reading in high school literature
Mhm.
classes. And you'd be hard pressed to get a kid to watch a 7-minute YouTube synopsis of that
Right.
book.
Yeah.
7 minutes, that's an eternity. So again, I love how you phrased it, whether you meant to or not. I think it's brilliant. We've trained our brains. That is a very real
Yes.
phenomenon that we can actually begin to remap the neuronal networks in our gray matter such that our synapses fire in a certain way. And again, I feel like if we have a cubic capacity to think and reason, then by definition, the wider it gets, the shallower it
Yeah.
gets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because like movies now have gotten longer. You know,
Good point.
in our day, a movie was 90 minutes. Rarely went over 90 minutes. There were a
Mhm.
few, and Gone with the Wind being one,
Yeah,
but
sure.
in general, they were about 90 minutes. And now, you know, the Disney movie, The Little Mermaid, that was out as the cartoon,
Uh-huh.
was about, it's not quite 90 minutes, I don't think.
Okay.
The new Little Mermaid. So my daughter and my granddaughter went to go see The Little Mermaid, and it's fine for adults because it's 2.5 hours. But my 6-year-old granddaughter,
It's a long time.
that's a long time for her to have to sit there. And
Yeah.
sure enough, she just was sounding like, I'm going to sleep. I'm done. I
Yeah.
just, but I thought 2.5 hours for a
Wake up. That
kids
ticket was
movie,
$12.
right? So they've created longer movies and held our attention, but there has to be lots of action. There has to be all
Yeah.
these different
Yeah.
types of
Yeah.
scenes and things
Yeah.
coming in and light and flashes and different stuff. Um, so we can sit through it, but it has to be a lot of moving parts and keeping the storyline
Right.
going and sudden action
Yeah.
parts,
Yeah. Yeah.
because otherwise our brain, those neurons and firing are like, what? Nothing's helping me fire
Sure.
again,
Yeah. 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 Whereas I need a shiny object,
Yeah,
as soon as
yeah,
I see a new shiny object, my attention's getting
right,
diverted.
right. And so the third one that I saw again is cultural, which is something, we
Hmm.
kind of already talked about, where just language and meanings of things, hand motions, verbal and nonverbal, they're different in other countries. And so some things are very, hey, and, but um, I know when I lived in Korea, and this has been a long time ago, you didn't tell somebody to come like
Yeah.
this. You
Yeah.
you did it
Palm down.
palm
Yeah.
down and
Yeah.
underhand. It was offensive to do it the other way, and you wouldn't, so there's different things
Sure.
obviously that can
Sure.
get in the way, and you don't want to offend. And hopefully, if you have somebody else from another culture coming in, they realize there's gonna be things they don't understand and hopefully don't take offense
Sure.
and look at the meaning of look at the context behind it. But you do have those things, and it can become important and, again, create a gap
Yeah.
in that time. Um, then there's contextual, and that's very much the same thing as, like, the, computer guru and me trying to share. I just
Yeah.
and I don't understand their terminology or.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I have conversations with folks like that, I don't even know enough of their lingo to try to recreate the conversation that obviously paints me as ignorant because I am. But like the analogy would be basically, it's like me taking my car to the expert automotive mechanic, and all I can convey to them is sometimes it goes rah, 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 rah. Other times it goes vroom vroom. Like that's
Yeah.
about the extent, you know what I
Right,
mean? So
right.
it's like the same type of,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, and that's
basically
all
I'm
and
doing
hopefully
charades, basically to
they
try to
can
communicate.
figure it out, but
Yeah, yeah,
so, and the thing, we don't know what we don't know, and that's always sometimes a scary part of business is that you've got to trust that the person who does know it is gonna take care of you and do you go to the mechanic and you're like, "I don't," and they goes, "Oh, well, this tube, you know, broke and it's connected to this and it caused this and this and
yeah.
this." I don't know. I don't know what I don't know, so if he says it, I'm
Sure.
assuming
Right, right, right.
that that's
But at least they
correct.
made the effort to communicate as opposed to here's your keys, you owe me $400,
Right.
right? So, but you talk about like you use the word trust, and something that I had stumbled across as a professional speaker years ago when I was just applying that craft in other capacities was Aristotle's approach to communication. So 2,300 years ago, he said that the three main components of effective communication are logos, pathos, and ethos. So logos, think logical. So the mechanical construction of what you say has to make sense to the person receiving it. Pathos has to do, you could almost use the analogy like your heart. Like there needs to be some sort of, in many cases, an emotional appeal to that person. And then ethos, it has to do with like that gut
Yeah.
feel. So think about, you come across a panhandler and they've got the pathos. Oh, whatever their story is, right? Like
Mhm.
I just got off work. I left my wallet. I can't get home. I need money for the bus. And then the logos, like you can't detect any fallacy in their logic, but your gut just tells you, man, no matter how polished this dude's line is, no matter how
Yeah.
sympathetic he's painting it, like your gut tells you, like, nah, I'm not giving you $2, right?
Right.
Well, when you're with somebody, I feel like if you have some degree of trust amongst you, you don't have to have an A plus on the logic or an A plus on, the delivery, like the pathos. But if they have a baseline trust and a rapport built with
Mhm.
you, I feel like of the three components, that's the one that tends to be the one variable that sustains
Right.
great communication up and down,
Right.
left and right.
And it does help you understand the meaning where somebody may say something and it seem a little gruff because maybe they've had a bad morning. It's
Yeah.
understanding, something. We were fine yesterday.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything that I've done
Right.
that
That's
has
right.
done that. So I'm guessing this isn't me because I know my
Yeah.
relationship with
Yeah.
them and whatever, so that part is important. So
Well,
the final one though is systemic. And that tends to be with the leadership down. If a leader is constantly saying, so they have a meeting and they say, all right, going forward, we are not putting up with anyone being late. You're going to be written up. You're going to do this. You're going to do. And the next week you see five people being late and nothing happens, then their communication to you has less power.
that's right. That's right.
And so it's, it's really important if you're going to take that time to speak something that you implement it.
Yeah. When there's that misalignment between words and deeds,
Mhm.
it creates confusion, and that confusion typically tends towards the negative. Rarely do people get confused and derive optimism out of that. Usually it's like, well, this is confusing, this must be bad. And a fellow officer, he was a Marine Corps infantry commander that we were in this graduate program together with when I was an Air Force commander. His phrase was, silence is consent.
Yeah.
And when we opened the show, we talked about different forms of communication, verbal and nonverbal. Sometimes silence speaks loudest.
Yes.
And especially when, as a leader, you communicate one thing, but then your actions are AWOL,
Right.
colloquialism,
Yeah. Yeah.
non-present. That is what people will remember.
Right.
They'll remember the lack of follow through. Yeah,
Right. And so, in order to lead and do that, you really do have to have that follow through. Um, because again, at that point, then people go, oh, it's another meeting. They're going to tell us to do something. Nobody's going to do it and nothing's going to change. And what, and so they tune out
yeah,
and don't take you seriously.
yeah.
So,
You know, Earlier you talked about context and something that like you look out of the parking lot and you see all these different vehicles. You see minivans that are very functional about transporting those aforementioned munchkins
yeah,
around town. The two-door sports car, the motorcycle, the Jeep. I mean, each one has a different utility. They all might share the same road, but then they can get off that road. They can do slightly
right,
different
right.
things. And I think when it comes to communication, some of us may be more naturally gifted at one-on-one
Yes,
dialogue. Some people, though they might practice their craft, are very gifted at getting up in front of a room.
right.
Some people are able to just seamlessly interject humor, into their delivery. And one thing that I really tried to work on earlier in my leadership career was developing skills across that range. I don't pretend to be necessarily great at any one of them, but I recognize that in a leadership capacity, communication is going to take different forms, and we don't always get to choose the
Yeah,
context in which we communicate. Sometimes, thinking back to a previous episode, we talked about difficult conversations. We need to be as well practiced at communicating during tense one-on-one
right.
interactions as we are when we stand up in front of a room full of our followers and talk about the vision for the next week, month, quarter, what have you. So can you think of maybe you know different contexts of communication that you experience at work and or maybe have had to go through in the past?
Um, well, as I mentioned, one, just the computer, and then even as my own business, I think the biggest struggle I've had is trying to get websites built. You know, um, something about it. I've tried pictures, I've tried,
Yeah.
whatever. I somehow do not speak computer language at all, and website language. So it's frustrating. I'm just like, okay, so we just don't get a website because
Right.
I don't know how to convey what I want. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's so clear.
Sure. Yeah. Right. I'll know it when I see it. You
Right.
keep showing me iterations, and I'll eventually it'll stand out to
Right.
me.
Right.
It's like
So,
I have zero interior decorating sense, but I can walk into somebody's house and go, wow, this is
yes, you
really
can
nice.
recognize. Right.
In a million years, I could not have done this,
Right.
but when I see it, okay, this appeals to me, right?
Yes.
And I think it's the same way because visual communication is becoming an increasingly part of the overall communication phenomenon. I mean, if you see just a tiny fraction of the Pepsi logo, you instantly know
You recognize
that
it.
is
Yeah.
Pepsi, right?
Hmm.
And so, like with a website, people, you talk about the 7 second, TikTok, trend. People, if they go to your website, they'll just spend a few seconds. It's almost like curb appeal at a house. They're going to know real quick if they want to stick around
Right.
and do
Right.
the walkthrough, right?
Yep, absolutely. So I know that we're getting close on time. So I wanted to give just a few things that leaders can do to try to make sure that you are communicating and effectively within your company. So the first one is, different people also communicate. There's auditory,
Yeah.
there's visual, there's, the hands-on, the connect. So first off, I think it's important to make sure that you actually speak exactly what you want. There's no question, and you speak it
Hmm.
concisely. Doesn't have to have a bunch of stories, but speak it very concisely, exactly what you want. I then think it's important to then send out an email to the group that has those bullet points to say,
Yeah.
just in case, because again, somebody may have missed those key points, a couple of those key points because they got a text
Right.
or something happened. So just send that out. I also think, encourage them to encourage, hey, I'm open for questions. So don't go out and feel like you don't understand this. Come to me if you have questions. You want to make sure that you're available so that they do go and work on things effectively.
Hmm.
Um, and then from there, make sure that then, and depending on the size of the organization, but you should have certain sub leaders in charge of certain things, So if you have 100 people working for you, it's hard for you to field
Right.
questions from 100 people, but you should have certain people that oversee and making sure that they have all the relevant information and are there to do that
Yeah.
and to then have that accountability that it is getting done. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so those are my takeaways for the day.
Yep. And my parting comment is that whether it is one-on-one, small group, or getting up in front of a crowd of 10 to 10,000, communication is a skill.
Yes.
It is a skill. And like all skills, it can be improved. Some people may seem naturally gifted at it. And I would always tell people that Shaquille O'Neal was born to be 7 foot 2 inches tall. But that man put in tens of thousands of hours to become the player that we all knew him to be.
Right.
So whether or not you are going to be metaphorically 7 foot 2 as a communicator, don't have a lack of confidence that because you may not currently feel like you're the communicator you want to be, it doesn't mean that you can't become the communicator that you want to be.
Absolutely. So we appreciate you joining us. We would love for you to like and share. Also, we love reading your comments when you leave them. You may have some other tidbits that you would like to add. We love hearing those. And then we are on Spotify, Audible, and Apple Podcasts, YouTube. If you want to go back, you can watch these on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube at any time. But subscribing to our channel and sharing it would be great. Also, that does help us grow. So we do appreciate you taking time with us, and we try to be fairly concise with that.
Yep. All right. Looking forward to it. See everybody
All right.
next Tuesday.
Next week. Thanks. Bye bye.